Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our genealogy jumpstart session today. I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian here at APL. We've got some in-person attendees as well as some virtual folks. So for us in-person people, there's a handout on the back table for you for today's session. If you've missed any of our earlier sessions, on the left-hand side, there's a couple of handouts from previous sessions if you'd like those. For the virtual folks, if you go to that link, apl.org/genealogy jumpstart, that's where you're going to find the links to the past handouts as well as the recordings. So we record every one of these sessions. So if you're just now joining us, this is the fourth session. You can go to our YouTube channel that's linked through apl.org/genealogy jumpstart to watch those past recordings. So I'll go ahead and get us started. Today we're going to talk all about cemetery research. So I didn't pay attention that today was going to be Earth Day, so how appropriate to talk about digging in earth to bury people on Earth Day, but that's what we're talking about today. So you might be wondering, well, why should I use cemetery records? What are they going to tell me about my genealogy other than where my person's buried? Well, cemetery records might be the only record of death for one of your ancestors. So, of course, we talked one of our first sessions about what time periods vital records are available and how they weren't always legally required. So perhaps before vital records were legally required, your ancestor still died and was still buried, so you might have a cemetery record that would point to their death date. Or if you have something like an obituary on that person, it might be vague on when they died or unclear, or maybe you can't even find an obituary depending on the time period. So those cemetery records might shed light on exactly when your ancestor died. The cemetery records might also identify that exact date of death, maybe even a date of birth of your ancestor, and possibly the location, or other relevant details about your family that you'd really like to know about that specific person. They can also help us identify relationships, which is really important in our genealogy. Like you could figure out who somebody's spouse was, or the parents, or maybe even a maiden name for those female ancestors that maybe you've had a little bit of trouble finding their maiden name. Cemetery records could also yield some additional clues to your ancestor's life. So sometimes you might see a certain symbol on their tombstone that indicates an organization that they were a part of, or that they had some sort of military service, or maybe even I've seen tombstones that have an exact date of marriage for the two people that are buried in that area. So again, another way for you to find some additional details about your ancestor. You can even sometimes identify additional relatives that you weren't expecting to find based on who's buried in that family plot or around your ancestors. So maybe you'll find infants that died young that you weren't aware of, or other young children that you didn't know about, or siblings of your direct ancestors that you weren't expecting to find based on who's buried in that area. Sometimes you might also see like an unused plot that is later sold to somebody else outside of the family. So it might be some sort of close friend that your ancestor was involved with, or a neighbor, or a more distantly related family member, like the parents of their daughter-in-law decided to buy it so that they could be near their daughter in the cemetery. So you can always find little details like that to help piece together the puzzle of all the things you want to find about your ancestor. Of course, through cemetery records, the big important thing that you're trying to do is identify that name of the cemetery where your ancestor was buried. You can also discover where that cemetery is located, where within that cemetery your ancestor's specific resting place is, even if they don't have a marker, because depending on when in time they might not have had a marker, maybe they couldn't afford one, or maybe they did at one time and it got damaged or destroyed or sucked into the earth and is no longer visible to you. Or maybe it's just so deteriorated that you can't read it. So there might be, ways that you can figure out what those markers said. Also, of course, knowing exactly where inside the cemetery your ancestors buried is really important for those larger cemeteries, because you could spend all day hunting through a cemetery and not find your ancestor unless you have that specific section number or plot number where they're going to be buried. So very helpful so you don't spend all afternoon searching. Once you have that information, you can also go see in person and preserve that resting place by keeping up their monument and cleaning it. Or if you're not able to visit in person, there's ways virtually where you can see what their tombstone looks like and preserve their memory and share those details. And we're diving into a couple websites today where you can do that. So first, we're going to talk about the various types of cemeteries. Just quickly, cemetery, of course, if you're not familiar with that term, it's land specifically designated as a burial ground. Very, clear that that's where people are buried is in the cemetery. If you hear somebody use the term graveyard, sometimes they do use the term graveyard and cemetery interchangeably, but graveyard specifically refers to a burial ground within a churchyard, which is that land that surrounds a church. So usually if you see that graveyard in the name of something, that means it's affiliated with some sort of church. So as you can see in the example here, it says Bethel Methodist Churchyard Cemetery. So it's got both those kind of churchyards and cemetery in that title. There's also a church cemetery or graveyard that you might see. Those also tend to be on church property. So it might not be directly within that land surrounding the church, but it might be down the road or some other area in town that church still owns that property, but it's not necessarily, oh yeah, it's the land right next to the church. Of course, these are also governed by those church leaders and seen as a religious sanctuary. There's also a city, a public, or municipal cemetery. So these are public property with many unrelated people from various backgrounds that are buried here. And it's owned and controlled by a governmental entity. So like you can see here, the Clearwater in Florida, Clearwater Municipal Cemetery. That means people who maybe died in Clearwater or had some affiliation with Clearwater decided to be buried here. And because it's a publicly open cemetery, they're able to do that. Of course, though, sometimes the names aren't always obvious that it is a city or a public cemetery. For example, for those locally, Oak Hill Cemetery in Neenah, that's actually the city of Neenah's cemetery, but you wouldn't know that from the name Oak Hill that it is owned by the city of Neenah. So sometimes you need to do a little bit of digging to figure out who owns that cemetery or who's in charge of those records. There's also ethnic cemeteries. So these can be private or public cemeteries, and they might overlap with other types of cemeteries that we're talking about. But they are kind of owned and operated to support one specific religion or specific ethnicity. So these are more historically, certain ethnicities or certain religions were actually prohibited from being buried in traditional cemeteries. So they had to create their own cemetery where their people could be buried. So like you're seeing in this example, there's this Beth David Jewish cemetery in Canada. So this is specifically a Jewish cemetery in Canada. There also might be a family or customary cemetery. So these might be on private property, but they usually served one family or a few related families. These might be a little bit more difficult to locate because they're usually on private property. But I recommend checking with local people like local genealogy societies, local historical societies, local libraries in the area where you're searching. And that customary, that means that it includes also those close friends and neighbors, in addition to some of those families that might be buried in that family cemetery. So for example, you'll see here the Adams Family Cemetery, not that Adams family, but a different Adams family. So this is in Snow Creek, Virginia, and you can see, this is a screenshot from Find a Grave, where it shows, oh, I can see what road it's on, but I don't have GPS information. So that shows you kind of how difficult it might be to locate this, and you can kind of see just a very basic picture of what that cemetery looks like, and who knows if it's on public property or private property or how you would get access to it. So I would follow up with somebody who lives locally who might know a little bit more for you. There are also memorial parks. So you'll see this name used frequently when talking about cemeteries. So these are usually a private commercial business property. It's non-denominational, so you don't have to be any specific religion. They might have some open areas around the graves that have trails or benches. They usually have flat headstones to make, maintenance of the cemetery a little easier. And they started introducing this type of cemetery in the early 1900s. Though be careful because some places use this term as a dedication of a public park. So you'll see the Washington Irving Memorial Park. It's not actually a burial ground, it's an actual park just named after Washington Irving. Oh, it's also an arboretum in Oklahoma. But there's also many locations around the world that use this as the modern term for cemetery. It just sounds nicer than saying cemetery. So for example, you'll see a photo here of Highland Memorial Park here in Appleton, where we have all those flat headstones. We do have this kind of part in the middle that has the upright headstones because it's a specific military area in the cemetery, but for the most part, all the other headstones are flat ones to make maintenance very easy. Lots of beautiful trees all around to make it really a more beautiful place to visit. There's, of course, military cemeteries. So we have national military cemeteries that are federally operated that would allow veterans and the military personnel and their spouses and minor children to be buried there. And then there's also something called a post cemetery. So these are specifically for those people who died in a specific battle or a specific war or were involved with a specific post in regards to the military. Sometimes they were often disinterred from their original burial location and then reburied in this post cemetery, for example. So of course, the big national cemetery that most of us Americans recognize, of course, is Arlington National Cemetery, where you've got all these beautiful military tombstones, of course. And then an example of one of those post cemeteries is the Fort Bragg Main Post Cemetery. And I just wanted to show you this quick on Find a Grave. It's got a little bit of information. So it says, it was established during the 1918 influenza pandemic for interments of civilian workers, most Puerto Rican, whose remains for a number of reasons could not be shipped. And then you can click read more to read more about the cemetery and how it was established and why it was established. So sometimes you get a little bit more background information depending on what type of cemetery it was. And I'll show you in a little bit more about Find a Grave and how to use it and how to search for specific cemeteries. There's also, of course, a potter's field or a pauper's field. So this is where the county or a city is going to bury the people who are poor, the people who they don't know who it is. They aren't able to identify that person, or they didn't have family who would have claimed them, or they were a criminal, or they died by suicide, or they were an illegitimate baby. So all these kinds of groups of people, unfortunately, are buried in these unmarked graves, usually in the potter's field or the pauper's field. Sometimes they're in a mass grave. Sometimes they do have individual graves, but there's either no marker or a temporary marker, or it might just be identified by a number, unfortunately. So an example here is the Potter's Field Cemetery in Green Bay, where it has no names of the people who are buried there, unfortunately. Of course, there's private cemeteries. So these, of course, are not going to be owned by any government entity. Usually a private organization or a corporation or some sort of fraternal lodge or even an individual family could own it. It could be a for-profit or a not-for-profit. It might just be limited to just family or a small neighborhood of people. Could be on somebody's private property. It's really a mixed bag when it comes to private cemeteries. And these are the ones that are a little bit harder to find and locate where they actually are. But you can see an example here of cemetery on a private farm just in Kentucky, where there's a couple of gravestones here within the trees of somebody's property. There's, of course, relocated or defunct cemeteries that might have been relocated at some point or closed to new burials, or they've fallen into disrepair and are no longer kept up. So an example here in Appleton, Riverside Cemetery actually used to be downtown right over here by where the Post Crescent building is. So when we originally started the city of Appleton, that's where they buried those people who died in the city. Then they quickly figured out that was not a great location to bury people. and then they moved to Riverside Cemetery. So that cemetery, if you would have had ancestors who died here when that city was still young, they might have been buried there and moved to Riverside, or they might be buried there and still there. So I would recommend inquiring with that local genealogical society, that local historical society, local libraries, who would be best to know if a cemetery has moved at any point in time, or what additional information they can give you about those cemeteries. If the cemetery is no longer active or no longer in use, there might not be a cemetery office or a sexton who is that person who takes care of the graveyard. Sometimes the sexton is kind of associated with a church and provides maintenance of the cemetery and all that, oversees the records and things like that. But even if a cemetery no longer exists, those records might still exist somewhere. So again, check with those local libraries, check with those local archives to figure out, okay, what happened to these cemetery records that maybe, they stopped doing burials in 1920, but they have those records up till 1920. What happened? Did they go to the State Historical Society or a local genealogy society that might have those books of records? We have questions so far before we move in to a couple types of burials, and then we'll talk about some specific cemetery records. I'm checking out my virtual folks. Any questions so far? Sure.
Example, Riverside, look at their office and talk to their staff, on the records.
Yes.
If you're looking at the asylum that's on the west side of the highway there, who holds those records?
That would be the county who owns those records. So off the top of my head, I don't know where those records are, if they're with the State Historical Society or if they're at the History Museum at the castle. Those would be the two places I would check first. Yes.
Downtown Pioneer Cemetery, they got Riverside.
Yes.
The individuals that.
You'd have to check with Riverside on that. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Let's see, we have a virtual question here. If a person buys a home with a private cemetery on the land, are they responsible for upkeep? That's a great question. It might depend on local laws. I mean, I don't know if you're legally required to upkeep it or not. I don't think so. I mean, it'd be a nice thing to do, just to upkeep, to preserve those memories of those people who are buried on your land. But legally, I don't know the answer to that. Good question, though. All right, so quickly we're going to talk about the different types of burial sites. So of course, the one we're mostly aware of is a grave. So that's of course an underground burial, typically within a casket or a coffin. So these can be a single grave or a companion one where there's two separate people in there. And there is a difference between caskets and coffins. So caskets are more rectangular in shape and may have some sort of lining inside to make it a little nicer. A coffin is tapered at the head and at the foot and wide at the shoulders. So here's an example of a grave, of course, at Union Cemetery in Breed of my second great-grandparent. So of course we are most familiar with, hey, this is a grave. I can tell it's a grave based on the headstone. But here is a photo to show you that difference between that coffin and that casket. So again, you see kind of that taperedness at the top, at the foot, and then the wideness in the shoulders for the coffin. And there's usually not a lining. And then in the casket, there's usually a fancy lining to make it look more comfortable. People also might be buried in a mausoleum. So this is an above ground building to house remains. It may also include some sort of chapel. It could be a single mausoleum for a single person or for a single family, or it could be a community mausoleum that's open to all. So I've got two examples here. This top example is the American Mausoleum in Peoria, Illinois, where you can see all these areas are mausoleums where people are buried. So it's, one larger area. And then this bottom example is the Sensenbrenner Mausoleum at St. Margaret Cemetery in Neenah, where it's just this specific family. And I know the picture might be difficult to see, but you can see a couple names that are listed here that would be associated with this family that are buried in this family mausoleum.
What about to the other extreme, where they don't have a plot?
What do you mean they don't have a plot?
Like someone buried in the asylum on
Yeah, so
they have numbers and you have to go to the mausoleum
Yeah.
or the museum to figure out. They go like, there's over 800 people buried there and it's just numbers.
yeah, so there are some that might be a mass burial or some that might have individuals.
It's from 1922 that I'm looking for my grandmother's father's grave site. And I have a March 30th of 1922, Wisconsin. And that's all I got to go on, and I'm looking for where's the grave site.
Yeah, so I'd follow up with the cemetery office that has those records.
Not for sure what cemetery office it is.
Sure. If you want to chat with me a little bit more about your specific question towards the end, so that we can get through our stuff and then
That could be
probably another hour. Okay, sorry about that. I have a presentation to give, so I can't answer a specific question.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think you should start out with the rich crap first.
Okay, thanks for coming. All right, moving on. There's also a tomb. So this is an enclosure for remains. It can be above ground or below ground. So for example, if you've ever been to New Orleans, they have a lot of these tombs because of their sea level and their water level and not being able to properly bury people underground. They also have a lot of vaults, which we'll look at in just a second. But of course, a really well-known one is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. So you can see it's an above ground enclosure where somebody is buried. And then vault is very similar. So this might be a metal or a concrete enclosure that protects a casket, and again, can be above ground or below ground. So here's an example of some vaults at Rolling Oaks Memorial Gardens. Then there's, I always struggle with how to pronounce this. Columbarium is how I think it should be pronounced. But this is an above ground wall with spaces for urns and cremated remains. So it's very similar to a mausoleum, except for it's just for cremated remains, whereas mausoleums might have that actual body inside those mausoleums, or they might have some cremated remains also. So this is an example of one from the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. Then of course there's crypts. So this is like an underground room, usually underneath a church. You usually find these out in Europe, but they hold remains of the deceased people or person. So here's an example of one in Poland that looked really creepy, but that's what I could find. Now we're going to dive into the different types of monuments that might be within the cemetery. So there might be several different types of monuments and names associated with these monuments when you are at the cemetery. So of course there's a grave marker. There's a difference between grave marker, headstone, footstone, all that. People might use the terms interchangeably, but there is a slight difference. So grave marker, this usually lays flat on the ground. A headstone is going to rise above the ground and it's placed at the head of the person. So you'll see an example of the Horace Artist's headstone at Riverside Cemetery here on the right. And then some people also have footstones. So of course, just like the name implies, it's at the foot of their grave, and it's usually a smaller stone at that footstone. There might also be a family stone. So like you can see in the middle here, this is one of my ancestors' burial sites at Bovina Cemetery in Shiocton, where they have a family headstone in the middle that just has that family surname. And then around them, they each have individual stones that have those individual names. So sometimes you might have just that one big, large stone for the family, and then each person has a smaller, not as elaborate stone, perhaps. Just a quick note on monuments, just because it's written in stone does not make it error-free. So remember that the person who's giving that information of what to put on that stone, they might have been incorrect, or maybe the engraver might have made the error and it was really costly to repair, or to fix that error, so they just never fixed it. You might, of course, find misspellings of your ancestors' names or an incorrect date. It happens. Your ancestor, of course, might have used a different spelling of their surname than other family members, so always be sure to look for those different spelling variations, even when you're looking at cemetery records, or even when you're looking at tombstones or gravestones. Also, it's important to note that there may be memorials for family that's buried elsewhere. So maybe that person died in war and they were moved to another cemetery like we talked about just a second ago. Or maybe a spouse is listed on a tombstone, but is actually not buried there because maybe they remarried later and they are buried with their second spouse instead of that first spouse, that at the time that that first spouse died, maybe they decided, hey, let's get that engraver to already put my name on it, and maybe not put the dates on it yet until I die, and then they decide, hey, actually I'm gonna be buried with my second spouse instead. Things like that have happened. So just be aware that just because it says their name on that tombstone does not necessarily mean that they are buried there. Even newer stones could have been created to replace those older stones, or the stones might have been erected even long after that person's death. So I have an example here. It might be a little difficult to read on the screen, but this is for my fourth great grandfather. And at the very bottom, it says, erected by the Menasha Historical Society in 1958 or 9. I can't quite remember which date. But you can see up at the top that he died in 1886. So this stone was put up quite a bit after he had died. So all this information on this stone, I need to double check and make sure, is this information right? Where's this information coming from? Let me find some sources to verify this information that's on this stone. Obviously, not everybody's tombstone is going to be as detailed as this one, but some great information that I can now follow up with and try to find some sources to prove the information on here. But of course, people who might have personally known Peter aren't putting this stone up because it's quite a bit after the time he died. Also, I just wanted to note grave rubbings. Those were something that were popular kind of during the 20th century, that people said, hey, to preserve that stone, let's do a grave rubbing, and then we can always see what's on that tombstone. It's no longer recommended that you do that because it's actually damaging to those stones. So if you think about taking a pencil or a pen or a marker or something and going over that, it's putting pressure on that stone. And some of those stones might already be brittle. So it's just kind of making it damaged further. So please don't do a grave rubbing. Of course, you might also find that your ancestors don't even have a monument. So maybe they never had one because maybe they weren't able to afford one, or the family wasn't able to afford one. Or like I mentioned, maybe the original was damaged over the years and they never were able to replace it, or somebody in the family just didn't replace it. If you're interested in placing a monument on their resting place, if they don't already have one, of course, contact the cemetery, because even though it might cost a lot of money, some might not allow you to do it, or some might have specific rules. Each cemetery is going to be different. Maybe you can't replace a tombstone that's already there, or maybe you can't have two stones there or something. There's all kinds of funny different rules depending on the cemetery. So that would be the first step, is contacting the cemetery. Like we mentioned at the beginning of why you might search your cemetery records, your ancestors' monuments might have unique symbols or abbreviations that help you learn more about them and their life. Some might just have decorations that are more universal, But there's certain things like, oh, it has a weeping willow on it. That just means sorrow or mourning or immortality. But some of them might be like, oh, this is the symbol for a certain club that they were involved in, or some sort of organization or fraternity that they were involved in. In your handout, I've got some websites for more specific on those symbolisms and the different abbreviations. There's also a couple books on the back table and books listed in your handout for you. We also, so one of the main ones that we have is Stories in Stone. So this is a complete field guide to all the different symbols and icons in cemeteries. So it's got a lot of different photo examples so you can see what these look like, and a listing of all the abbreviations and symbols you might be able to see. So I would look at a picture of your ancestor's gravesite and look at this book and see what the symbols might mean. We also are going to have a program in June, on June 12th, all about cemetery symbolism and how to properly clean gravestones. So Angie Knutsen's a local genealogist who's going to give that presentation for us. And then on Saturday, June 14th, we're actually going to meet at Riverside Cemetery where she's going to do a live demonstration of how to properly clean a tombstone. And we're going to look at some of the symbols that are around Riverside Cemetery and point out what some of those symbols mean. So if you live locally, feel free to join us. That June 12th one will be hybrid for those virtual folks who want to join us on Zoom. But the one at Riverside, unfortunately, is just at Riverside because we can't get Wi-Fi in the cemetery. So, any questions before we move on further? Sure.
You said grave problems, why did they do that in Vietnam? Well, Washington, they wrote. They do that all the time,
So you're probably not supposed to. I don't know about the Vietnam Wall, how susceptible that is to damage, but of course, if you think of anything that you're putting pressure on like that, that's not good for it. Yeah, obviously the Vietnam Wall is a lot newer than some of the gravestones that you might rub or have known that people have rubbed, but I personally still wouldn't do it. I mean, yeah, you can take pictures of it. That's,
Particular design that
yeah, that's possible that it is unique in design that they encourage people to do it, but I would check with the people there to see, okay, is this actually damaging to it or not? But I personally wouldn't do it. That's just me.
One thing for they wear a number 2 pencil out very quickly.
Yes.
And on the paper because it's very deep.
Yes. Yeah.
I never.
Yeah. Well, if you visit the Vietnam Wall and somebody says it's okay to do it, then go for it if you want to, but I wouldn't do it for any gravestones. Quickly, I want to talk about cemetery transcriptions. So you might find these in various different formats. So you might find it in a book form or a digital format. So there's different websites or different databases available. Of course, book form, we have a lot at the library, or check the local library in the area you're researching. Or sometimes the local genealogy society or local historical society or even the cemetery might have books for sale that have been done over the years that would have transcriptions for their specific cemetery or cemeteries in the local area. So these transcriptions were usually conducted by a local genealogy or historical society on a volunteer basis. But it's really helpful sometimes to refer back to these older book transcriptions, even if you find some of these online. And especially now, if that monument is now very difficult to read because of all the weather conditions or just the test of time, that maybe it's very difficult to read it, but maybe in the 1970s when they did that transcription, maybe it was more readable and they were able to transcribe what it actually says on it. Of course, just like the format's going to vary, the amount of information that's going to be in these transcripts is going to vary as well. Sometimes they have a really helpful map of the cemetery and a history of the cemetery. They might have listings that are alphabetical or that are arranged by plot, like a section A, section B, section C, or they might do them both ways. Sometimes they list all the information on the stone. Sometimes it's just the name and those vital dates, like their birth date and their death date, or birth year and death year. So you always want to be sure to kind of read in the beginning to see what might be featured in that specific resource. They might sometimes also add additional information that might not be found on the stones, but might be found in burial records. So maybe they're put, it might not say on that tombstone who their spouse was or who their children are, but because of the cemetery records, they're able to piece together that information, and they might have it in these book transcriptions. Of course, just like with anything, errors can happen at any time because this is a derivative record. It's not an original record, so you always want to verify whatever you're finding in these transcriptions with seeing the gravesite in real life, or seeing a photo of it and comparing it to those transcriptions if you're able to, or finding additional sources to verify what's on here if you're able to. So here's an example of a cemetery transcription book that I have. It's The Permanent Residence of the Garrison Cemetery in Marion Township, Ohio, from 1837 to 1927, that I purchased through the Garrison Corner Cemetery Association. They are the people who upkeep the cemetery where I have family buried. So you can see an example here is showing you some of the epitaphs of somebody's grave. And then some of these listing the surnames of all the various residents, their gender, their birth, their death, parents, and spouse. So of course, all this information is not going to be actually on their tombstone, but again, it might be things that they found through those burial records, or doing a little bit of genealogy research that, yeah, this is a great hint for me, but I always want to verify this information with other sources to make sure that I can confirm this information, not just take it at face value. Here's another example. So I got this email newsletter from the Wisconsin Historical Society a couple weeks ago that I thought was unique to share. So it mentions that their collection in Madison contains hundreds of cemetery indexes, histories, and abstracts from across the United States and Canada. So the cemeteries found on our shelves can range from large cemeteries like the cemetery in Savannah that's really well known, to small rural ones like the Stockholm Township cemeteries in Wright County. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for closing the door. So there's lots of different resources that they might have at this Wisconsin Historical Society library in Madison for you. They've also got specific congregations or racial and ethnic groups from all around the United States, even all around the world. So definitely, even if you don't have Wisconsin ancestors, check out the Wisconsin Historical Society. They have a rich collection of cemetery transcripts and other history on cemeteries. There's of course also websites. So like I mentioned earlier, Find a Grave, we're gonna dive into that in just a minute. But there's something called GenWeb. So GenWeb stands for Genealogy Website. At one point in the 90s, every single state had a state GenWeb, and then each county within each state had a site. These sites, unfortunately, are mostly no longer updated, but some of the past content you can still get on there. So one way to do that is to go through usgenweb.org. And from here, you can actually pick any of the states that you want to search for. So say, oh, I want to search for California where my ancestors are buried. So now you can see there's a whole counties list here. You might also see other information if you scroll down and look around, like, hey, look, there's a California tombstone transcription project, or there's a California gravestone photo project. So I might click on these links and explore a little bit more to see if I can find my ancestors in there. Or if I know I'm looking for a specific county, I can click on that county list and then find whatever county I want to search for my ancestors. So say I want Sonoma County, I might click on that and then be brought into that specific county's genealogy website. So again, some of these are nicer looking than others. Some of them have been updated a little bit more frequently than others. Some of them are no longer active. You might get a link that says this website is no longer available. But if it is available, feel free to look through these and see what they might have. Look through and see, can I find any cemetery research in here, or even just a brief history of the county, or whatever resources locally I'm looking for. So again, you can do this for every single state, every single county in the United States has one of these. There's also a world one, so worldgenweb.net. This is the landing page for every single country. Again, some no longer have sites anymore or never had sites to begin with. So you might find a lot of broken links on here as well. But it is a place to start if you're looking for a specific area. So say we were talking about Canada earlier, maybe I'm looking for Canada. I can see all the listings here and you can see, oh, Burma doesn't have one or Christmas Island doesn't have one. But I can look for that specific country that I'm looking for and click on it. So here's Canada. And now I can see some information here that it might give me some links to search in. So maybe I can find some more cemetery related things in here.
That one was the .org. Thank you.
So the US one is the .org, the world one is .net, and it is in your handout. I also recommend searching in Google or whatever search engine you prefer to use, or searching for those local historical or genealogical societies. So search for that name of that cemetery and the location, plus transcription or burial records. So something I might search is Outagamie County cemetery transcriptions, or if I have a specific cemetery name like Oak Hill Cemetery burial records, or maybe I'm just looking for a genealogical society in the area, so I can search Milwaukee County Genealogical Society and see what results I get. So just to quickly show you what that looks like, again, just do something like Outagamie County cemetery transcriptions. And like right here, I can see Outagamie County cemeteries. So this is a partial gravestone transcriptions for various Outagamie counties. So now I want to click on that and explore more. Or the next result, I can see it's a tombstone transcription project. So again, I could go through all these results and search to see if I can get some more information, to see what cemetery I can locate or what various information I might be able to get through the online websites. Or again, if you search something specific like Oak Hill, cemetery burial records, sometimes you get the little AI helpful thing, but if you scroll down, you can see, oh, like I mentioned earlier, Oak Hill is run by the city of Neenah. It's a municipal cemetery. So I could click on it and see their website. They usually have some sort of history or some sort of information on here. There's even a map on here, and I can search burial records online. So some cemeteries do have burial records online. Some do not. It really depends on the different cemeteries and what they choose to do. A couple other resources that you might locate in regards to cemetery records. So if your ancestors served in the military, they might have filled out this application for military headstone. Of course, one of their relatives would have filled it out for them after they died. So this is an example of my second great-grandfather, John Kepschel, who served in World War I. So his wife, Gertrude, filled this out after he died with his service number, what branch of service, his rank, all that kind of stuff. Of course, his birth date, his death date, what kind of marker they wanted, where the cemetery is located, all this kind of stuff. I've even got an original signature of that ancestor of mine. These are usually 2 pages. So be sure if you find this, like I found this on Ancestry, or it's also on Ancestry Library Edition, that you save both pages, because this is just the first page. So the second page, I'll show you just a quick example. There's also a listing on Family Search that you can search. So first I've got to sign in to Family Search here. So one way to find it, if you go under Search and click on Records, you can of course put in your ancestor's name over here, but what I want to do, because I want to specifically find this collection, under collection title, I'm going to type in headstone. And I can see every database that's going to have headstone in it. So I can see, oh, they've got a Canadian headstone one, but here's that United States headstone applications for US military veterans. So now I can click on it and then search just within this database. So say I just want to search my last name and see what pops up. So if you see a little camera, that means that there's an actual image attached to this. So I can go ahead and click on this one and see what it looks like. So now here is an application for the headstone. Depending on the time period, it might just be one page or it might be 2 pages. So this one I think is just a 1-page one, but this one is going to be, you can see again his rank, his company that he was involved in, his date of death, where he's buried, all that kind of great information that's on there. So this is just one type of record that you might be able to find. Of course, you're going to have military markers if they served in the military, but be aware, not every single veteran has a marker identifying their military service. For example, I have an ancestor who served in the Civil War, who is buried at Riverside Cemetery here in Appleton. Nowhere on his tombstone does it say he served in the Civil War. Thankfully, in his burial record that's within the Riverside office, it does mention his Civil War service. But again, just because you don't see it in the cemetery does not mean that they did not serve. You want to do a little bit more digging, see if you can find any records related to it. But here's an example of the flat bronze marker for John that we saw his application just a few slides ago, where you can see what it looks like. Even though it's flat, it's upright for some reason. I don't know why they call it a flat one when they put it upright, but maybe they goofed up. And then here's another example of a flat marker that's actually flat. So here's his regular tombstone that he's featured on, and then right next to it on the right is where this tombstone is, where it lists his World War II affiliation and then his birth and death dates. And again, be aware, memorial park, like we had talked about as a type of cemetery, doesn't always mean flat stones though, because this is obviously an upright stone. This one's a flat stone, but it does have to do with the history of the cemetery. So originally it wasn't a memorial park cemetery, or that wasn't the official name of it. So some of these older burials have upright cemetery markers compared to the flat ones that you are traditionally seeing in a memorial park cemetery. So just be aware of that. You might also find some interment cards or registers or burial records. So they're going to be all various types of titles, whatever that cemetery chose to call it. Usually these are coming from that cemetery office. Some have been digitized and put online on some of the genealogy websites like Family Search or Ancestry. Some are only offline, so you might have to go to that cemetery office if it still exists, or maybe they've transferred it to an archive like the Wisconsin Historical Society or a county museum or county genealogical society or some other small library that might have it. So here's an example from Milwaukee of the Holy Cross Cemetery interment records that are available on Family Search. So again, you can see what lot number they are, their surname, their first name, their residence, some more detail on what block and section and lot number they are in the cemetery, what grave number they might be, and then the number of interments that they were. So again, some basic information, but this might be the key to, seeing who's buried around them and how they might be related, what their last residence was, things like that. Or you might get something that's more like an actual card. So this is another example from Milwaukee, but this is from Pilgrim's Rest Museum that I also found on Family Search. So this has a little bit more information on a typed card. So it's of course got his name, his address, that specific location within that cemetery, the birth information, so his exact date of birth and location, that exact date of death and location, even a burial date. Sometimes they list a cause of death or an undertaker, which again are helpful details that you might be able to then follow up and see, okay, does this undertaker have records that might be at the Wisconsin Historical Society or at the Milwaukee County Genealogy Society? Maybe they have records from this undertaker that I can get more details on this specific person. Here's an example of a burial record that I have for my ancestor at Riverside Cemetery. So you want to look for clues that could lead you to more records. So for example, like I showed you here, here's the name of the undertaker, it's Brett Schneider Sons. So now I could now look to see, okay, do they have records somewhere? Does that company still exist? If not, what happened to their records? That undertaker, if you're not familiar with that term, they are the ones who prepare the body for burial or cremation or the funeral. Sometimes it lists a church or a clergy person. You can follow up. Is there some sort of religious record that would be at that church where that person would be affiliated with? Maybe I'd need to look at the city directories if it listed a clergy person there or that church name and see, is there death in that church record that might have some additional details on it compared to this burial record that I got from the cemetery? But again, on this burial record, you can see the various pieces of information, of course, the name of that person, birth date, location, place of birth. For some reason, they wrote it on the line above and not in the space. But you can see the last residence, who she's married to, her spouse's name. There's a spot for occupation, or if they're a soldier or a sailor, date of death, cause of death, father's name and birthplace. So even though they don't have a first name, we at least have a little bit of information to go off of, a little bit of a clue. And then again, some further details that you might have, specifically related to where she is in the cemetery. You might have memorial cards. So these are something that became popular in the 1880s. They were originally mass produced. So like this one on the right is something that was mass produced, that maybe a lot of family members got a copy of this. And it just lists basically their name, maybe their date of death, and some sort of religious saying or Bible verse or some thing to help ease people's mourning, that they would have handed these out maybe at the funeral or close family members would have received. But I think this one, that's my great grandma, that you can see, this has a little bit more detail, like her date and place of birth, her date and place of death, details on her surface of her funeral, who the pallbearers were, who the officiants were, where she's buried, all that kind of stuff. So those might be something that you come across in people's personal papers, that you're cleaning out your aunt's house or your cousin's house, and they have all these funeral memorial cards that give some details that will help point you in the direction of where that person's buried. There's of course church records. So again, just like any other record, the amount of information is going to vary depending on that church, depending on that time period. They're not required to give you access to these. But if you be nice and you ask nicely, or sometimes be patient and be kind, or give a little donation, you might be able to get access to these records. So here's an example of a record from St. John Evangelical Lutheran Church in Hayes in Wisconsin. It's written in German, but you can see this top here. I can see the person's name, her maiden name, what date she was born in, what location in Germany she was born in, or West Prussia. And it says she's the widow of John. I can see her death date, when her funeral was, the cause of death, how old she was, and then this is the spot where they list people who survive her. So even if it's in another language, you can usually kind of fill in the blanks, or hopefully have somebody help you figure out how to read a different language. So, for me, I don't read German, but thankfully there's a couple genealogy groups on Facebook that there's a lot of great people who read German and who help transcribe and translate it to tell me what this means. Of course, you might have inherited a family Bible or have a family member who inherited it. It's really difficult to locate those unless someone in the family has it and you know that specific person who has it. I always recommend checking with your extended family or your distant cousins who are researching your same family. Some people unfortunately do resell them, or if they find them at an antique store or they found them at Goodwill, you might find them for sale on eBay. There's also some Facebook groups that might be trying to reunite people with their family Bibles. There's also a site called Bible Rescue that is popular and well known for, you can search for a Bible by family name, for example, and see if there's any results related to your surname, that you could then see a couple of the names that are listed in it and see if it's people that are related to you. I also recommend checking what I call SLAMs. So SLAMs stands for Societies, Archives, Libraries, and Museums. So you want to check all those local societies, those genealogy societies, those historical societies, the archives, so local archives, state archives, libraries, of course, again, locally or in the county or in the state, and then museums, of course. They might have wonderful resources for you locally, depending on where you're searching. Unfortunately, few Bibles are scanned and online, but you sometimes are able to locate them. So for example, I found this one of the Powers family from Delaware County, Ohio, through the Historical Society, that they have this and they freely put it online for other researchers to find. So again, check those local societies, those local libraries, those local archives and museums. Of course, if your person was buried, they would have had to have permits to do that. So they have two different types of permits. They have a removal permit and a burial permit. So you might find these sometimes digitized online or sometimes offline. They also might have had a certificate of dispositions of remains if they were cremated. So again, look online for some of these or look at those town and county levels or through the historical societies or genealogical societies that might have these records passed down through whatever government agency had these. I found this one on Family Search. So this is a permit for removal and burial of somebody in California. That again, you can see some information that's very similar to what we would find on a death record, like their age, their sex, their color, religious or marital status, date of birth, age, occupation, birthplace, father's name, mother's name, cause of death, all that kind of stuff. So as you see, it looks very similar to a death record in some cases, but maybe a death record didn't exist for this person, depending on that time period, or maybe it was easier to find this permit than it is their death record. This, of course, also gives you that information of where they are buried. So you can see the Susanville, California county section and what date they're buried, who the undertaker is, all that kind of great stuff that you can then follow up to see if records exist. Of course.
Who would be holding that in the cemetery?
So if you're going to find it online, again, I would check, of course, the main genealogy sites like Family Search, Ancestry. If you can't find it on those main ones, I would look locally. So maybe a genealogy society, a historical society, or the state historical society or genealogy society might have those records. They might be online, they might be offline. So again, check societies, libraries, archives, museums in the area.
But not like a city clerk or register.
So if it's offline and they still hold their records, like more recent records, it might be at the county level, yes. Yes.
Question regarding funeral home records. A number of years back over in Two Rivers, I went to Pond and Stangle looking for, there was a period of time when I was very young. The people were dying and I had no idea, after having been doing research for a number of years, what happened if I go to the funeral home. If I go to the funeral home and they've got a number of my relatives who were buried through that funeral home. And then there were others around that same time that there was no record in there. Why would something like that happen?
So funeral home records, they're private records. So you just never know. Of course, you know, if we think about funeral homes today, they might have more than one employee. It depends on who you're going to get. Just like you would anywhere else you go, the level of service might vary. Their attention to detail might vary. Maybe they're going to leave a couple blanks, or oops, I forgot to file that, or maybe the papers got shuffled around and it accidentally got thrown away. All kinds of various scenarios. So just like any other business or organization, you know, you might have really great details for one family and not great details for another family, even though it might have been within days or weeks or months.
Well, it was kind of big old years.
Yeah.
And you know, and jumping back, at the time of getting church records, I made an appointment to go to a church to require the birth, marriage, death records from the church. And when I got, this doesn't happen all the time, when I got there, they had, the people that are still in that church, related to my long deceased relatives. And they wound up printing out 10 pages of birth records, and some of my family members were in there. Extremely helpful, and I noticed earlier you had set up to be courteous and polite
Yeah.
and donation. Yeah, that works.
Yes.
It does.
So for those virtual folks who couldn't hear that, somebody was just sharing about how helpful some churches are. So you just never know what you're going to get. Some, I've reached out to some churches and had to reach out multiple times and never heard back. Other churches, you give them a call or you send them an email and, oh yeah, absolutely, come on in anytime, set up an appointment, and they say, here are our records, hang out, do whatever you need, take pictures, make copies, whatever. It really, again, it's going to depend on who you're talking to and, if they're comfortable with people just coming in and looking through the records, or if they really are more private and don't want to, hey, tell me your name and I'll look in the book and find it. It's going to be a mixed bag of what you're going to get, but always check. So funeral homes, like I was just mentioning, are private records. So they can choose to not give you access to their records if they wish. They aren't legally required to. It is a private entity. Of course, the amount of information or the content in their records are going to vary, like I just mentioned. But the great thing about them sometimes is sometimes they also have a copy of the death certificate. So if you're having trouble finding a death certificate for somebody that you know should have a death record, depending on the time period, I would check and see if that funeral home still has it within their records. It's possible. You might find some funeral home records digitized online, but it's less likely than some of the other records that we've talked about. Most of them are going to be offline, but Family Search and Ancestry, the two kind of main genealogy sites, have some collections. So you can see this example of the database is just called Florida Funeral Home Records from 1887 to 1971, that this just has some funeral home record for this person. That again, you get that name, where they were born, who their spouse was, the address, date of funeral, place of death, date of death, occupation, marital status, birth information, religious information, their age, parents' names, and then where they're interred. So again, you just never know the level of detail that you're going to get in one of these records. If that funeral home no longer exists anymore, again, check those local and those state SLAMs. So those societies, those libraries, those archives, those museums. Usually if something doesn't exist anymore, hopefully they would have said there's historic value to these records. Let me transfer it to that local historical society or that local genealogy society or the state society that can then take possession of these records and keep them for us. So fingers crossed, you'd be able to locate them somewhere. Yes.
On this one, but I find it funny that her name is Susie. So possibly, but that's actually Will's.
Susie, it doesn't say if it, but it's either wife or widow or blank. I mean, this person, whoever filled it out, wasn't super detailed, but in parentheses over here, it does say wife. I mean, it lists her name twice, so.
And Victor, weren't that old, probably her real name is not.
Yeah, I mean, again, people might use a nickname. They might, maybe Susie isn't her name, maybe her name's Susan or Suzanne, or maybe that's just whatever name she went by. Maybe Butler's her middle name, maybe it's her maiden name. Again, we don't know. That's why we always want to follow up with additional records to see what other sources we can find. But this at least gives a little clue that we might be able to follow up on.
My mother's name has been literally.
It is good.
Yeah, like my name is Katie. People always say, oh, is your real name Catherine or Kathleen? My real name is Katie. My parents named me what they wanted to call me, so. You just never know. Of course, you can also find miscellaneous funeral records. So these are two really great records I found in the Civil War pension for my ancestor, Ira J.S. Holmes. So these are local to Appleton. These are the J.C. Kunitz and Son. This is the livery service that would have participated in his funeral. So that you can see the hearse and the pallbearers and the bus and all this kind of stuff that would have been required for his funeral. And then from the Brett Schneider Furniture Company, this is the casket and embalming and all that fine kind of stuff that's involved. That you can see, what the charge is during that time. And again, these are some of the local records that you might be able to find. You might be able to find them locally or in those societies, those libraries, those archives, museums, or even in something that you weren't expecting it to find. I wasn't expecting to find these in his pension file, but they just happened to be copies of these receipts in that pension file. So saved me a little bit of work of having to locate them myself. There's of course lots of other types of records. So there might be institutional records if they were part of an asylum or a hospital or a prison or a poorhouse. The access on these is going to vary depending on the different laws in that location. And if these records still exist and where they exist. We actually a few years ago had a really great talk from Lee Grady from the Wisconsin Historical Society that talked to us all about institutional records. There is still a video recording of that on YouTube. Even if you don't have Wisconsin ancestors, he talks to you about different locations where you might start your search and how they're usually in those local or state societies, libraries, archives, museums. So always remember societies, libraries, archives, museums. Those are the places you always want to hit in that place where your ancestor lived and died. In city directories, sometimes you might find some death information in there. It's going to vary city to city and year to year, but some city directories include a listing of all those people who died within that year previously. Some even actually include an exact date of death. You could also use the city directories, of course, to locate what cemeteries are in existence when your ancestor is living there. If you can't locate where they're buried, look at the city directory the year or two before they died or the year or two after they died. What cemeteries are in that local area that are potential locations where they might be buried? There might be monument maker records. So again, just like funeral homes, these are going to be private business records. That access and availability is going to depend on the time period, if that company still exists, or what happened to those records after they closed their business. Again, they might have transferred to a local or a state archive. They might be digitized and online. They might be offline. Again, check those societies, those libraries, those archives, museums. Those are going to be the locations I would check if I can't find them online. If your ancestor had more unusual or uncertain causes of death, like an accidental death, or maybe they were murdered, unfortunately, you might find some additional records like a coroner record or a medical examiner's record. Again, these might predate those vital records that, maybe they don't have an official death record, but maybe they have a coroner's record or a medical examiner's record. Sometimes you can find these indexed or abstracted, so they'll take little pieces of them and put them in a book form, or they might be on genealogy sites. So for example, there's the Salt Lake County Utah Coroner's Inquest case files. That's a database available on Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition that if you had somebody who died in that location during one of those time periods that's listed in that database, it might be worth a search to see if you can find them in those files. If it's not online, of course, check with that city, that county, that state to see if they still hold those historic records and what those access restrictions are. Usually they're open to the public, or if you can prove that your family, you should be able to access them if those records still exist. But some of those historic ones, again, might be transferred to a state or local society, library, archive, or museum. If there was an autopsy, which is that medical exam of a body after death, there might be autopsy records. Again, if that death was uncertain or questionable or suspicious in some way. So these sometimes are found in coroner's records or hospital records. The hospital records are going to be private, but you might be able to access, again, if you can prove that you're next of kin or if they still exist and haven't been destroyed. It's, again, going to vary depending on the different hospitals and what their rules are. Each jurisdiction is going to have its own rules and its own access for those specific records and what happens to them after a certain length of time. Maybe they're transferred to the Historical Society, or what they decide to do with them. So I would always, again, check societies, libraries, archives, museums. questions so far before we move on to the last part? See what kind of questions we've got online. What about foreign countries? What do you mean, what about foreign countries? Foreign countries have cemeteries too. They have, records for cemeteries as well. Again, I talked about the World Gen Web. I would start there or start in some of the resources like Family Search, start with Ancestry, see what you're able to locate. What governmental office would have issued permits? So it'd be at the county level, or the state or the city level. Usually like we have like a hold on. Can you still hear me, people? I know my in-person people can. Let's see. So there's always a technical thing sometimes. Okay. All right. I think governmental office, it's going to be either the health department or Register of Deeds. I would start at the Family Search Wiki and search for something like burial permits, New York, or something like that. And it would tell you specifically, how that state handles those burial permits. Let's see, great uncle died at the Battle of Petersburg, body never came back, suspect mass burial. Any working being done with these mass burials now that DNA testing is available? Not that I'm aware of. I have not heard of any of that, but it's possible that maybe they have. I'm not sure. I think for some people, they prefer not to have their people disturbed after they've been buried, but never know. I'm not sure. I have not heard that personally. Any questions from our in-person people? Yes, people can hear me good.
Yeah, a couple times you mentioned library edition of Ancestry.
Yes.
What's the difference between the library edition and what you get?
So the difference between Ancestry Library Edition and Ancestry that you would get at home, Ancestry Library Edition is free. You don't have to pay for it. Whereas the Ancestry you would use from home, you have to pay for it, and sometimes it's not very cheap. They're also going to have limited collections in the library because of course they're not going to give you access to every single collection because then nobody would have subscriptions, or some people would just to access it at home. But the library edition you can only access inside the library. It's going to be a subset of the collections that you can get from home, but still a good amount for free. They do have world collections on the Ancestry Library Edition. So for me, like my German ancestors, I don't have the world subscription of Ancestry. I just have the US subscription. So yeah, I can search on it at home when I'm not at work and do my genealogy. But then when I want to search for those German ancestors, I do it when I'm in the library because the library edition has German records. So I would check it out when you're in the library and see what you can find. You also can't build your tree in the library edition. So our next talk in May is talking all about creating your family tree online, which you could do through Ancestry even if you don't have a subscription, but you can't do it through the library edition. Looks like a question came in. SLAMs, societies, libraries, archives, museums. I use that phrase a lot, so you hear me say SLAM a lot, or try to remember to always say societies, libraries, archives, museums. But in case I don't, that's what it stands for. All right. So now you're probably wondering, well, how do I find these cemetery records that you've showed me some of these awesome examples for? So step one, we need to identify that name of that cemetery where your ancestor was buried, assuming they were buried. So some potential clues where you might be able to find that cemetery name: their death record, if you found their death record, their obituary or a death notice that might be in the local newspaper. Of course, searching in cemeteries near where they died or where other family members are buried might be good indicators of that they might also be buried there. After you do that, you need to learn where the cemetery is located or was located. Maybe it moved since they've been buried there. So what I usually do is check, does the cemetery have a website? they may make it easy for me. They might even have a record search on our site, like we looked at before with Oak Hill Cemetery. They have a burial search integrated right in their site. So what I would do is I would go to Google or whatever search engine you want, type in that cemetery name in that city and that state. So for example, again, I'd go to Google. I would type in Oak Hill Cemetery, Neenah, Wisconsin. And then again, that top result is that Oak Hill Cemetery website. Again, like we saw earlier, they have search burial records online right here, or it's over here if you missed it, down over there. They've also got a cemetery map. So I can click on it and be brought into their little area where I can search cemetery records. So right here, I can pop in my ancestor's name or just a surname if I prefer to do it that way. And now I can see all these people buried here. And I can say, oh, Irving's the one I want. And I can click on it and it pops in here and shows me exactly where in the cemetery he is. I can see who else is buried around him. I can zoom really far out and see, okay, how do I get to that exact spot in the cemetery? Oh, I know I need to go around this way and it's in this section. So it might include just really basic information like their death date and burial date, but maybe if I contact the city and the people who hold the records, I might get some more detailed information like the examples that we looked at earlier that might have his parents' names or his birthplace, things like that, that would give me additional details, but this at least gives me a little idea of what I might be able to find in an easy way that I can find him within the cemetery. I also wanted to show you an example of some cemetery maps. So like we just saw on the website, they might have a map on their website. So this is an example of Fort Howard Memorial Park, which I found on their website. You can also sometimes find a history of that cemetery on their website and some contact information like a phone number or an email address, or maybe they have a form where you can fill out and say, hey, my ancestor's buried here. Do you have any burial records that you might be able to send me, especially if you don't live in the area where you can easily go there to get those burial records? You know, maybe it's in New York or California. Maybe they'll be able to send you an email with those records or send you snail mail a copy of that record. Note that sometimes the cemetery offices actually might not be on the same property as the cemetery, so you always want to check in advance before you make a trip to that cemetery. If you are making a trip to that cemetery and expecting, hey, I'm going to go to the cemetery office while I'm at the cemetery and ask them for a map or ask them for burial records, they might not be on the same site as the cemetery. But it's important to note that you might get a more detailed map if you visit the cemetery. So compared to what I found on the website, this shows me a general overview of the cemetery. But when I go to the cemetery, they give me this little more detailed map over here. And then I've got this whole detailed map over here with all the different names. And they even helpfully circled the people I was looking for so that I could go and actually find specifically where they are, compared to on the website, it just shows you just numbers and not a name associated with those people. You, of course, also want to check online resources. So Find a Grave, Billion Graves, and Interment.net are the top 3 kind of cemetery record websites specifically related to cemetery records. So I'll go through these quickly. Find a Grave is a free site where you can search. It's going to feature burials that are organized by cemetery. You can also search by the name of your person that you're looking for or by a specific name of a cemetery and location. They also have many memorials that might include photographs of the burial of your ancestor, sometimes also of that person or related family members. Sometimes they also have obituaries on there or other genealogical data. You know, somebody might write like a little short biography and put it on there. Be aware though, this is all user submitted data. So it's not 100% accurate. You take it with a grain of salt, use those additional sources that you might be able to locate to prove any information you find on here. So quickly, I'm going to show you an example of how to use Find a Grave. So it's just findagrave.com. So like I said, you can search by the person's name. So for example, I'm going to put in John, and the last name is Kebschel. I can put in a year that he died, for example. So I know he died in 1969. I can put in a location if I want to, or maybe I'm not quite sure where he's buried. But I want to click search and see what I find. So I can see right away, oh, look, there's a picture of him. It's got like a little overview. If I click on it, I can see some additional information. So each person essentially has a page within Find a Grave. So I can see their birth information, their death information, burial information. Sometimes it lists a specific location within the cemetery. Sometimes it just lists the cemetery. Again, sometimes you've got a photo in here. So I've got a photo of him. I've got a photo of his military headstone. And here's a photo of his headstone that he shares with his wife. I've got a little biography in here. I've got some parents linked here. I've got a spouse listed here. I've got siblings. I've got children. Again, this is all user submitted data. You want to verify that this is right. I know it's right because I'm the one who put it on here based on my research. But of course, you don't know the validity of who's researching this and what information is correct and what's not correct. If you scroll all the way down, you can actually see somebody originally put it on here. I reached out to them and said, hey, this is my second great grandpa. I'd really love to contribute more to his memorial. I know a lot of stuff about him. So she transferred his memorial to me. So now I can edit it and add whatever I want to contribute more to his memorial. So you're able to do that if you'd like to maintain your ancestors. Yes.
How do you sort out the good and the bad?
Sorting out the good and the bad. Oh, that is a great one. You're going to always want to try to find primary information. So if I see this data up here of this is his death date, okay, I want to find a primary source document. I want to find his death record. That's going to for sure tell me that, yeah, that is his death date. This is the death location. Same with the birth date, same with the parents' names. I want to find as many primary source documents as possible. And we talked a little bit more about the various types of information in our first session on getting started. So there's a handout for that at the back table, or you can watch the recording also on our YouTube channel. But this is just one aspect of Find a Grave. Again, I can click on each of these people then and find more information. You can see some of them are more detailed. Again, be aware, you can see who's contributing stuff. You can reach out to them and ask them further stuff. Sometimes they have more photos than what are shown, so I can click see one more, and there's actually an additional photo. This actually is not this person. And I've reached out to this person and said, this is not a photo of her. This is her cousin, because I have seen the photo that this person used. And she still has not taken it down. So that's why we always want to take this with a grain of salt, verify, depending on where this information came from, if we're able to. Of course, if you've never seen a photo of your ancestor, or you compare this photo to that photo, you could say, yeah, it kind of looks like her. Well, it's because they're related. So you have to do your best on seeing what's true and what's not true with what information you're able to locate. And maybe you reach out to her and say, hey, where did this photo come from? How do you know for sure it's her? Is it written on the back that it's her? Or what does it say on the photo that you have? Or who you got it from? Were they for sure on that identification? Another thing on Find a Grave that you can do is also search by location. So for example, I can go up here to the cemeteries tab. Say I just want to look at all the different cemeteries that are in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. I can put that in that cemetery location. I can put Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And I can click search. And then it's going to give me a listing. So now if I am trying to find an ancestor who I know is buried in Fond du Lac and I'm not quite sure what cemetery, I can see all the various options here. I can even click within these cemeteries and now search just within this cemetery. So say, oh, this one sounds like it might be promising. Let me see if my Johnson ancestor is buried here. So I can type in that surname and then search just within that cemetery. And now I can see there's, how many results here for this cemetery. I could click on it and learn a little bit more about each person. Some of them give more specific things like a section or a block or a lot. Some of them don't. So again, it's all user submitted stuff that's on here. What you get is what you get. Another thing I wanted to point out on these kind of overviews of the cemeteries If you look over here on the left-hand side, it usually gives some sort of directional information. Sometimes it gives a phone number as well, where you might be able to call that cemetery or that church that it might be affiliated with to inquire about different records. As I mentioned earlier, you can request edits to the different memorials. So say somebody put some wrong information on there, or you have some additional details that you want to put on there. If you have a free Find a Grave account, which you can create one if you don't have one, you can sign up for one and then send the person a message and say, hey, I want to add these details, or, oh, I don't think that death date's quite right. Here's what I have from their death record, and you can request that they change it. You can also request that they transfer that memorial to you if you would personally like to make those changes. Again, you might get some contact information or some very basic information of where a cemetery is located. I also want you to be aware of this. This was also on that kind of cemetery overview. So you might see it says 662 memorials, 90% photographed, 4% with GPS. Be aware that this is kind of misleading. This means that 90% of these 662 memorials have photographs. It's not necessarily a photograph of that gravesite. It could be a photograph of just a random thing. It doesn't mean that these 662 memorials are all the memorials that are in that cemetery. So this is very misleading. It's just whatever is on Find a Grave, that's what these numbers mean. Again, you want to verify anything that you find on here, verify those relationships like those spouses, those children, those parents that are linked to there, because again, that's somebody who's making those connections and not necessarily backing those connections up. Billion Graves is another free searchable site that features information on burials. Again, it's also searchable by name of that person or by cemetery name. The difference here is that Billion Graves, every entry in Billion Graves has a GPS coordinate. So it's really helpful to have that GPS coordinate to point you to that exact spot in the cemetery, especially for those really large cemeteries. The downfall of that is you need a paid subscription to Billion Graves to access that GPS information. So if you're somebody who, hey, this summer looks like the weather's going to be great, I'm going to travel all around to all the cemeteries, maybe purchase a subscription to get those GPS coordinates and then cancel it. Also with Billion Graves, every entry has a photograph of a grave. They sometimes have better quality photos if you have a paid subscription as well. Every burial also on here is verified that the burial exists and where it is by a volunteer. The main search on Billion Graves is completely free to do. They do have some additional features that are behind that subscription paywall. So if you want to see, for example, what nearby burials there are to your ancestor, which is really helpful in finding those additional relatives, that's a paid subscription thing that you have to be able to pay the subscription in order to see it. So we'll go into the site and I'll show you quickly what that looks like. I don't have a paid subscription to it, so I'm just going to show you what you get for free. So right here in the given names part, that's where you would put your surname. So the surname you can, or in the given name, I'm sorry, is the first name. The family name is the surname that you're looking for. That's what I meant. So click on Start Your Search, and then it's going to show me all the examples here. I could refine my search over here on the left, like if I want to refine them by death year, or where in the world they're buried, for example. Like maybe I just want to look at the Wisconsin ones or the Florida ones. You can do that over here on the left. Otherwise, again, you can see kind of just a general overview of the people. I can click on it. So this guy, I can see again his birth and death information, year, or his age. I can see he's affiliated with the military. Again, it gives me kind of like a really crappy looking photo, but if you upgrade to Plus, you get a better photo. So that's the downfall of Billion Graves, unfortunately, is it makes you pay for better access. And you can see, oh, if I click on any of these things, it's going to ask me for money. Again, I need to upgrade to see, oh, there's 5 additional Stilps that are by him and all these other names that are by him. So if I scroll down, I can see he's actually at Riverside Cemetery in Appleton. Again, it's got GPS information, but I have to pay for that. So it would show me over here if I had a paid subscription. But it kind of gives you other information it might have in the paid subscription. And it tells you where it got this information from, or where you can source it.
Question,
Yes.
how much is the plus?
How much is the plus? I can't quite remember. Yeah, let's see. I think I put it in your handout, but it says you get instant access for just $5 a month billed annually. They do have, yeah, let's see. So you can either pay $5 annually or $10 a month, depending on how much you want to do. And it gives you the kind of overview of what annually and monthly are and what you can access through there.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So just like find a grave, you can also search by cemetery. So to do that, let's see, let me remind myself, search billion graves. And you go under cemetery search. So now again, I can put in the cemetery name or that location. So maybe I want to search Suring, Wisconsin. I can see some examples of some cemeteries already popping up. So maybe I want this one, and then it brings me kind of the little map of where that cemetery is located. Then I can click on it and see, oh, there's 18 headstone images. And you can search within those. Sometimes you might need, again, that paid subscription or not.
Right.
Yes,
County.
sure. Do you have a specific place in Marathon County?
I just want to see how many cemeteries are this.
Yeah, so this one's showing cemeteries with 20 or more images. So this is even all of them.
Can you? By a year, in 22.
Not within here, you can't, no. Yeah, so there's a lot. I would look at the local like genealogy society and historical society. They'd be able to give you a better list probably.
And you're Edgar.
Yeah, so you can put in Edgar in there and see what you get. Or also try find a grave, which we were just on. All right, a quick little overview between find a grave and billion graves. Billion graves always start with that image of that gravestone and then use that image to connect to that person on a family tree. Not the other way around like it is in find a grave. Find a grave, you don't even have to have an image. I've actually found memorials on find a grave that aren't even connected to a cemetery. And for people who have no gravestone. So for those ancestors who might not have a gravestone, you might not find them on billion graves because they require a photo to be on billion graves.
Find a grave, list people that don't have a headstone.
Find a grave will list people that do not have a headstone, yes.
That era, do they have like a coroner's report that they would list, I mean, is that an essential thing back then?
It depends on the location, what records are, and if it's a coroner's record, it would be like an unusual death or something like that. Not everybody is included in a coroner's report.
Did they list them then back then? I mean, was there any rule? Couldn't just bury your dead one, loved one in the backyard?
Yeah, so we talked about permits earlier. I mean, you left for a little bit, so you missed quite a bit of content, unfortunately. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to repeat all the content I just repeated because you decided to leave. So it's in the handout if you want to take a look at the handout, or we're recording it, you're able to watch the recording. So, like I was mentioning, billion graves is not as complete as find a grave, not always accurate location-wise on find a grave. So for example, St. John Cemetery in Hayes, Wisconsin, it lists 436 memorials on find a grave. That same cemetery is listed as being in Suring, Wisconsin on billion graves, and it only has 50 memorials listed. So again, there is a difference between the two sites. I would use both of them and see what information you can locate. Again, like I mentioned earlier, billion graves helps you find more family with those kind of graves that are nearby, even if they have different surnames. But again, that's premium content that you need to have that subscription for in order to access that. Both those sites also have a smartphone app that you can have on your phone if you have a smartphone. So if you're actually in the cemetery and researching, it might be helpful to have those applications on your phone and know how to use them if you get a good enough signal in the cemetery to be able to have those. Sometimes they lead you right directly to that gravestone, especially in those larger cemeteries. Then the third one is interment.net. So this is a free website that features a lot of transcriptions of headstones from around the world, as well as a couple burial records. So here you can search by name, you can browse records by region and certain special collections. So they have one that's all dedicated to US veterans, one that's related to mining disasters, etc. On here, submissions can only be edited by the person who uploads it. So say somebody from the cemetery office uploads a whole collection of data from their cemetery. They're the only ones who can make changes to it. You cannot access anything to make changes from it. Also, interment.net is not as extensive as Find a Grave and Billion Graves. They don't have as many photos on here either, but it's still worth searching. So again, I would check all three of them. And quickly, I'll show you what the site looks like. So right here, you can go ahead and search. You might be tempted to search up here, but you can see up in this little corner, it says it's actually powered by Genealogy Bank. So if I do my search up here, it's gonna try to pull me out to Genealogy Bank and ask me to do a subscription. I don't wanna do that. I don't wanna pay for a subscription. I wanna search with what's within this site. So right over here, this little search box is the box that I actually want. So here, I'm just gonna pop in a surname and I can click search. And it's going to be similar to what results you might see in a search engine like Google. So I can see, oh, here's an Oak Hill Cemetery listing for Nina, or here's Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Mateo County, or Wood National Cemetery. So again, I can click on all these results and see further information of where they are. One thing I wanted to show you quick is if you click on one of these results, so say it might be like, oh gosh, these are a lot of results. I don't want to go through all of these to see my ancestor's name that I know is in here. What you can do if you have a Windows computer, there's a control button, CTRL. You push that button and the F button at the same time, and it pops up this little search box up over here in your browser. And then what you can do is you can type in that name that you're looking for. And now it's going to bring me right on the page of where that name appears. Now I don't have to look through, this is like 3/4 of the way down the page. I don't have to keep looking through all of that. And I can even go to the next result. If it's further down on the page instead of right next to it, maybe it's, halfway down the page or a quarter down the page, it goes to those results one by one if you click these little arrows there. And then one other thing I wanted to show you on this interment.net, if you have a specific name, they always want you to do last name, first name. So I can do like Hamilton, George. I put it in quotation marks so it knows to search that specific phrase and not every instance of Hamilton and every instance of George. So again, I can scroll down and see all the different results here and click on those as I would like. Another way you can search in here is by surname and by location. So for example, I could put Johnson and Florida. So say I want to find all the Johnsons in Florida in the records in here. And again, I can search and see all these that are in here that have that surname and that are located in Florida. So I'm not sure if wildcards work on here or not. It does have an advanced search tips here. So let's see. So you can use wildcards, it looks like. So you can use the asterisks to find a partial match, it looks like. All right. If you still can't easily locate information on where that cemetery is located or was located, again, I recommend reaching out to the SLAMs. So those local and state genealogical societies, those historical societies, those libraries, those archives, museums for more information. Be aware the name of the cemetery may have changed since your ancestor was buried there. I think Find a Grave is really good about listing additional names. So I always search by the name I know it as. which might be the old name, and it likely will come up. So for example, if I'm searching for Appleton Cemetery, it might pop up that now it's called Highland Memorial Park. If your search doesn't come up with a result, I would look for all those cemeteries in that geographic area. So say, I know it's in Appleton, and then you can see in the results field that they have this little line below each of the official names as also known as Appleton Cemetery or Appleton Highland Memorial Park will be listed right underneath that in Find a Grave. So that's a great way to find, if your ancestors' record says Appleton Cemetery, well, this is what the Appleton Cemetery is now called. Then once you've located that cemetery, you can locate those cemetery records. So from here, you can contact that cemetery office or investigate where those records might be held for that cemetery, especially if those cemeteries no longer exist. So we're going to search some of those online resources like Family Search and Ancestry.com and the websites of our local societies, libraries, archives, and museums, as well as the statewide ones. Of course, resources might be offline. So again, those local and those state societies, libraries, archives, museums. If that cemetery still exists, of course, contact them about if they have records, what records they have available. If you have a specific name, specific date of person that you're looking for, that's really helpful for them to look in their records and see what they might have. If it's affiliated with a religious institution, of course, you're going to want to contact that church and say, hey, I have an ancestor who's buried in this church graveyard that I'm looking for additional information. Here's the name, here's the date, or whatever information you have, and see what they are able to locate for you. Once you locate your ancestor in that cemetery, they may be buried in a family plot or be buried near other extended family members. So look at those people that are buried near them. Could it be the parents of a female ancestor? Could it be a married daughter that you didn't know about that might be next to them or behind them or in front of them? Again, that nearby graves feature on Billion Graves is really great, but again, it requires subscription. Or sometimes those cemetery records might shed some light on those nearby plots, or just old-fashioned walking around the cemetery, if you're able to visit in person, is a great way to find additional relatives or people who might be affiliated with your ancestor. Especially those smaller cemeteries, people tend to be buried near each other. Of course, when visiting a cemetery yourself isn't possible, maybe there's a volunteer in that area who might be able to get a photo for you or walk around the cemetery for you. So one thing I didn't show you on Find a Grave is you can actually request a photo. And a volunteer who might live near there is going to see, hey, there's 10 requests for this specific cemetery that's 10 miles down the road from me. And I'm going to go to that cemetery on a nice sunny day and go take pictures, and then I upload them to Find a Grave so that these people who don't live nearby can see a photo of their ancestors' final resting place. It could take days for that person to do that. It could take weeks, it could take months, or even you might still be waiting years later because again, these are volunteers doing this. There's no, oh, I have to do this for this person. It's, they're all volunteers, or maybe there's not a volunteer who lives local enough, or they don't get there very often, or you requested it in winter, everything's buried in snow, you might need to wait until the weather's nicer. For finding funeral home records, it's a very similar process. Again, you want to identify that funeral home name using the clues in your existing records. You want to search for contact information, and you want to contact them to find out where their records are, if they still exist. Of course, you can also search the web for funeral home records. So search funeral records plus the name of that city and that state. So for example, I could search funeral records, Green Bay, Wisconsin, and see what I get. All right, so I might need to scroll through some other things like obituaries, Register of Deeds office. You just never know what you're gonna get. I can see vital records stuff. Oh, I can see here's a funeral home. Now I can contact them. Here's another funeral home. So again, you might need to scroll through some not relevant results, but it could give you some clues as to potential funeral homes that exist. Once you go on their website, you want to look for a contact section. So usually they'll list a phone number or an email or a mailing address where you can contact them. Some might even have a genealogy section or an obituary section, but usually the obituaries on here are going to be more newer obituaries from the last few years or so. You can also, of course, search the local genealogical and historical societies, as well as those statewide societies, because they might be preserving those funeral home records or those cemetery records, especially for those places no longer in existence. So maybe that funeral home closed back in the 50s, and then they transferred their records to the State Historical Society, for example. Any questions before I show you Ancestry Library Edition and Family Search quickly?
When did cremations factor in a lot to this? Because that would throw a little bit of a, you know, depending upon if they actually buried the
Yeah.
remains.
Cremation's more of a newer process, I'd say within the last 70 years, maybe. Don't quote me on that for sure, but I'd say definitely more so nowadays than 100 years ago. I mean, if you're looking for your ancestors, they're likely buried and not cremated unless there's a reason for them to be cremated.
Right. Everything comes
Yeah.
out, so I thought,
Yeah. Well, now there's like this trend of more like organic burials and things like that. You just never know. I think one of the books back here, it's like Over My Dead Body, I think it's called. One of the books talks a little bit more about kind of the history of cemeteries and burial practices and stuff like that, that might be able to shed a little bit more light on that. See if I got any virtual questions here. All right, is it possible on Find a Grave to see who's buried near the ancestor? It is not, because not every place has a specific section or lot number or anything like that. I mean, you could scroll through all the results in that specific cemetery on Find a Grave, but again, Find a Grave doesn't for sure have all the burials on there.
But sometimes
Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't, so. Find a Grave is not always accurate when it comes to locating the grave itself. Somebody said, I was directed to another private website to correctly locate the 5 generations of my family buried there. So again, just like any other website, you would verify whatever you find on there. Someone said, on Find a Grave, is there any way to tell when the last group of photos were taken? I believe on Find a Grave, it does say when those photos were added on there. So let's pull it up again quick. So if I search John again. So I think if you click on the photo, yeah, it'll tell you when it was added. So you can see I added this all the way back in 2012. And I can click onto the next photo and see, yep, that one was in 2012. That one is also in 2012. So down here will tell you when the photo was updated or when it was added. So you can see how old it is. And I mean, actually, I took this photo probably back in like 2006 or something. So that might not even be accurate. I mean, I didn't upload it to Find a Grave until then, but this was probably 2006 that I did the photos in the cemetery. Let's see, what else we got here? Control F is where you use that specific find function on a website. Control and the F key. And that's on a Windows computer. I'm not sure what it is. Probably Apple, and F on a Mac computer. All right, now I'm going to show you how to find some cemetery records on Ancestry Library Edition. So like we talked about a little earlier, Ancestry Library Edition is kind of a subset of the paid subscription of Ancestry.com, or you can use your paid subscription if you have it. It's going to be similar to how you would find the things here, but of course the Library Edition you can only use in the library for free. And then, what else was I going to say? I just lost my train of thought. You can only use the Library Edition inside the library. Paid edition, of course, you have to pay for. Library Edition is completely free. If you're using it within the library, you would go to apl.org. That's our website where you would start. Click on eLibrary. It's going to give you an A to Z listing of all of our databases. And you can scroll down to right here where it says Ancestry Library Edition. Before I pop in there, I want to click on this more details and just show you. I've got a couple little things in here for you. So it gives you a little general overview here. It also tells you Heritage Quest Online is similar to Ancestry Library Edition, but you can use Heritage Quest from home. So if you're looking for census records, for example, instead of spending all your time in the library searching for those are all available on Heritage Quest. And we'll talk a little bit more about Heritage Quest and Ancestry Library Edition in June, I want to say, where I'll show you a little bit deeper dive into each of these sites. I've also got a user guide, and I've got a video that I did a few years ago all about Ancestry and Ancestry.com. And this user guide tells you a little bit more about how to use this library edition. So if you're somebody who's just beginning to use the library edition, this will show you how to do the basics like searching and saving a photo and all that kind of stuff. But to get into the resource, you can just click on Go to this resource. So there are a couple different ways to search on Ancestry Library Edition. One main way is to click on this search tab, and you can click on all collections. So say I'm specifically looking for cemetery records. I can see over here on the side, it says death, burial, cemetery, and obituaries. So I can actually click on that. And now it's going to show me I'm in this little section all on death, burial, cemetery, and obituary records. So I can do a search for my ancestor right in here and know that I'm just going to get results that are related to these 4 things. So I can type in my ancestor's name here. I can type in some information, like maybe I'd want to put in his death year, for example, and maybe the death location. Maybe I just know it's Wisconsin. Maybe I don't have anything more specific than that. But I can put in as much or as little as I want to in here. I wouldn't put too much in here. The more you put in here, the narrower it's going to make your search. So I try to start out more basic with very little information before I click the search box. So now I can see I have 50 results right here, including that headstone for application for the military veterans that I showed you an example of earlier. So now I can see like a little index preview of it, and then I can click on the image to actually see the image of it. And so now I can save it right up here. There's a button to save it. If I click on this send image home, it's going to ask for my email address. Since I'm in the library, it knows, hey, maybe this person wants to save this image, and it's going to ask for my email address. I can put that in, and it will send me an email of this image. Or I can just save it to the computer. So maybe I brought my own laptop to the library, or I have a USB drive or something I can save it to that I can bring this home with me if I want to. Over here, the little wrench icon will give you a couple more tools, like maybe I need to rotate it, or I want to print it, or maybe I want to play with the colors on it or something, or other settings you can play with as you'd like. Again, we'll dive a little deeper into this in a couple months, but this is just basically showing you how you would quickly find a burial record or some other cemetery-related record. These arrows, of course, are the front and back. So again, this record is actually 2 pages. So you always want to make sure you're going to the second page or seeing if there's a second page for a specific record. This one doesn't give very much information, but others might give a lot of information. So you never want to miss that second page. I can go back with that arrow and then go back again to get back to my results. And now, hey, I see there's actually a link to Find a Grave that's going to point me out to Find a Grave, bring me into that Find a Grave search that we already looked at. But this is another way that we can search through that. I can see death records and Social Security death index and other things related to death. So not always necessarily cemetery records, but because this is our death, our obituary, burial and cemetery record area, this is going to show you all those related type of records. Another way that I really like to search is also through the card catalog. So to get there, you can click on search, and then it's the bottom results, that's card catalog. So think of a card catalog just like you would the library catalog, where you can search within this part of the site to learn what resources are in this website. So from here, you can search by a title or by keyword, or I can just start using these links over here on the left-hand side. So maybe I want to click on this birth, marriage, and death. And then I want to click on the death, burial, cemetery, and obituaries. And then, hey, maybe I want to filter by location. I want to filter by the USA. And then I want to filter by a date, for example. So I can keep on clicking on that. And then maybe I want to throw in a keyword, for example. So maybe under keyword, I want to put funeral and click search. So now I can see these are in some way listed to funerals. So for example, I can see a Wyoming Lakeview Cemetery interment cards for a certain period of time. I can click on this and then maybe I want to search for an ancestor who's buried in here. And so I can complete that search just within there. Or sometimes it allows you to browse over here. Some might be by year, some might be by surname or by location. Every collection is going to be different. Another thing I wanted to point out is if you scroll down here, it gives you a source information of where this came from. And so you can see Wyoming State Archives, for example, if I wanted to follow up to see if they had additional things past 1933. And there's also this section where it tells you a little bit more about this specific collection. So I can read through this to see what data might be in here. Sometimes it might say something like, oh, it's missing this county or missing this year or something like that because something happened. So before I start searching, I usually read through this quickly to learn a little bit more about what I'm going to search before I search. So this is a great way to find what things are available for a specific location that you might be searching for. So if we go back to the card catalog, I can even get more specific here by narrowing down by a more specific location or putting in different keywords. So I can use this keyword thing for anything I want to. I can type in cemetery, for example, and see what results I get. Any questions about Ancestry Library Edition? Yes.
Put a keyword like,
I think children's probably too broad, but you could try. I mean, I wouldn't put a person's name in here. This is, like you can see this, these are the results it's getting. It's the name of the collection. So it's usually a location and then a record type. So you can see Rhode Island death registrations, District of Columbia death certificates, obituary index, a cemetery interment cards. Those are the types of things you're going to want to search in this part. Yes, the census is on here. It's not going to be in this specific part though, because we're looking specifically for death, burial, cemetery, and obituaries though. All right, now I will show you how to search for some of these cemetery and funeral home records in Family Search. So Family Search is a completely free site to use. You do want to have a free account with Family Search if you don't already have one. And be sure you're signed in. So I'm signed in from earlier when I showed you an example. But from here to search, I would click on search and click on records. So there's a couple different ways you can search in Family Search. The main one is going to be this search bar right here where I would search my ancestor's name. What I usually do is I click this more options first because it's going to give me options to put in things like their birth information or their death information or a spouse or a parent's name. So I usually like to have those out first. So I type in my ancestor's name I'm looking for. And then under death, I want to put maybe something like Wisconsin to narrow it down to a specific location. And then click search. So from here, I have like 23,000 results, which is a lot. So maybe I don't want to go through all of these. It's going to take me a really long time. So there's also filters up here. So similar to how we saw the filters on the left-hand side on Ancestry, you have filters up here where I can narrow it down by collection, and then it's going to give me options. So, oh, I don't want to look at these census records. I want to look at these birth, marriage, and death collections. And then I can click Apply Collection Filter. So now it's just showing me those birth, marriage, and death related records. And now I only have, 7,400 results instead of all the other ones. So again, I can kind of skim through these and see, oh, this Wisconsin Death Index, maybe I want to click on that and look at that. Or, oh, here's a billion graves page for this person. So that would bring me out to billion graves and show me what that looks like. Or, oh, here's obituaries related for them. Things like that. So I can keep going through these or keep filtering more and more and more in here until I get less results that are more relevant to my person. Another way I like to search is if we go back to that search in that records pot. So similar to how we use that card catalog in Ancestry, if you scroll down, there's a spot that says find a collection. So from here, I can type in a collection title. So I can type in something like cemetery. And now I can see all the different results. So I can see Argentina, I can see Alabama, I can see Arizona, Australia, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to give me all these listings of cemetery featured in these collections. I can even do things like funeral. So again, I can put in any type of keyword. I can see the funeral home records for Florida or Germany or Hungary or Idaho or Kansas, all these different locations. I can even put in a specific location here. So like if I wanted to find that Florida one, I could put in Florida and then cemetery. There's nothing on Florida cemetery, so maybe I can do Florida funeral, and now I can see, oh, there's one result for that specific location with that specific keyword. And then again, once I find something I want to search in, now I can do that search of my ancestor's name right here, just within this collection, and get more relevant results. Another thing I like to do before I do the search is clicking on this how to use this collection. It's going to bring me out to a site that's going to tell me a little bit more about that collection, kind of how we just saw in Ancestry, where it's telling me what's in that collection, what the records could tell me. It's going to give me a sample image, all this kind of great stuff that you might want to read through before you do that search. And then this is just going to show you all the things that are indexed. So indexing means somebody has typed a name that's in this record in order for you to be able to type your ancestor's name and find these records. But there's also lots of unindexed records that are not, that are scanned on Family Search, but you can't do a keyword search and find them. So in order to find those, if you go under search and click on images, this is where you can find a lot of records. So from here, you are going to search by a place first. So for example, maybe I want to search for Ohio and click on search. So this is a lot of results. You can see 187,000. But now maybe I want to search, certain area in Ohio instead of just the whole state. Maybe I want to search Ashland County. And it even gives me further places if I want to search further places that are more narrow. Another way you can filter it down here is by date, if I have a specific date range, or by life event. So if I click on life event, I can see death is in here. So I can click on that, and you can see cemetery records are included in here, death records are included in there. Once I select that, I want to be sure to click update. And now I can see, oh, there's some death record indexes, some funeral home records, things like that. So I can kind of quickly see what time period and what location they're going to be part of. I can see there might be, 1,000 images or 100 images. And then I can click on that and then go through these, because again, these aren't indexed. I might need to, look at these and see, oh, maybe do they have an alphabetical index in the beginning, or these aren't indexed at all. Maybe they're by year or something like that, where I might need to go through 100 pages before I find my ancestor or not. Any questions about Family Search? I'm also going to do a session all about Family Search on May 5th. It's a Monday at 7 o'clock. We're going to do all about searching in Family Search. The German Interest Group of Wisconsin is hosting me as their guest speaker, and I'm doing that here in the library or on Zoom as well. So we're going to dive deeper into how to search. That's more than just a quick 5-minute overview of how to search in the site. All right. There's also a new cemetery section on Family Search. So this is something new that they just rolled out earlier this year. So I definitely recommend that you check that out. I personally haven't played with it a whole lot yet, but this is a tab in Family Search that I just want to quickly pull up and show you. So again, if you go back to Family Search and click under Search, there's a cemeteries button now. So now in here, I can search location or a person's name. So maybe I want to search Appleton, Wisconsin. And I can click on search. And now I can see all these cemeteries that are affiliated with this location or near this location. So here I can see Highland Memorial Park is a cemetery in Appleton. And now I can see there's 10,000 people that it's listing that they know are buried in here based on what's put into the family search family tree. So I could narrow it down in here. I could search by a specific person if I wanted to. And see, I can see this guy is buried in Highland Memorial Park, and it's included in his tree. So again, I haven't played with this a whole ton, but feel free to explore on your own. It also links you out to Billion Graves and Find a Grave. So it's something they're still developing. It's new, experimental, limited search right now, but feel free to play around and see what you can find on there. And again, just want to mention that searching in Family Search is happening May 5th at 7 o'clock here at the library or on Zoom. So you can find a link to that in your handout or go to our events calendar at apl.org and take a look and register on Zoom if you'd like. And then quickly, I want to show you the Family Search Wiki. So we've talked about the Family Search Wiki a couple times in our past sessions, but if you're not familiar with it, this is an area where you can look for specific record types and specific locations, and it kind of helps guide you to how to search in a specific location for a specific record type. So for example, I could type in Wisconsin cemeteries. And then it's going to give me a whole listing of information. So I can see all these links that have tombstone transcriptions online. I can see lists of cemeteries in the state that it's going to link me out to resources, or specifically Jewish cemeteries in Wisconsin, or military cemeteries in Wisconsin, or where else I might be able to locate additional information on cemeteries in Wisconsin. So again, you can type in any location and it would pop out what information is relevant for that specific location. I can even do it for international countries. So again, in the search box, I can put in something like Germany cemeteries. Some of these are more extensive than others. It really depends on the amount of information that volunteers have compiled for us. But again, it might give you a general overview, gives you some links to resources for you to check out and explore. So that one's not as extensive as the Wisconsin one, but again, gives me a starting point of some resources to check out. And this is again, completely free for you to use. And then quickly, I wanted to show you again, like we looked at earlier, some cemeteries have burial records directly right into their websites. So here's an example, again, of one of those. So I can search Riverside Cemetery in Appleton. I know that they have one. If I go into their website, I find it right away on the Google search. And then right here, it's very obvious. Click here to search for a gravesite. Sometimes you might need to poke around their site a little bit to find exactly where you're going. But right here, easily you can type in that name of that person, either just their surname or their full name, and see what you get. So I can see what results there are. Here's Ira Holmes. And I can see what block he is, what lot, what grave, his birth information, his death information, burial information. He's a veteran with the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. I can see a map of exactly where in the cemetery he's buried. So now I know I just need to go in here and turn left, and then I can see him right over here. But again, this is just kind of basic information. When I contact Riverside Cemetery and say, hey, do you have a burial record for him? I get additional information. They actually have copies of his obituary and other things that they shared with me. So it's worth a shot to also reach out to the cemetery, even if they have one of these sites built within their site that you can search for their records. They still might have additional records off-site. I'm not sure how up-to-date their site is. You'd have to ask Riverside or the cemetery for sure. Like if they had a burial last month or last week, is it on here? I don't know how often they update it. There's also a really great resource called the Ancestor Hunt, where they have resources by state. It's not going to be a complete listing, but it's completely free. It's just the ancestorhunt.com. If you go to resources, they've got a bunch of different other resources, but they also have cemetery records. That's what I'm going to point out for you today. If you click on that, they've got a couple like videos and other things that you can skim through or scroll down, and then you can see all these state-by-state resources. So say I'm looking for my Illinois ancestors, I can click on the free Illinois one, and then it will point me to some resources in that specific state where I could see what's available. So sometimes it's got some general information, and then it's got some more specific by county sometimes, or it might have statewide resources. Again, every state's going to be different, and what resources are on here are going to be different depending on what's available in the state. But another way that you can search for additional cemetery records that might be available that aren't necessarily on Family Search or Ancestry, or maybe they are, and they're just trying to link you to these resources. And then I wanted to mention quickly, Cindy's List is another great resource, completely free, cindyslist.com, where you can again search for cemetery resources. So she's got some categories here. If you click on categories, sometimes some ads pop up because of course they've got to pay their bills. They've got to make it free for us. So you can click specifically like on C if I want cemetery records, or if I'm like, hey, I just want to like look for a specific location, you can see like Central and South America, or there's United States one, or Scandinavia. So you can go by location or by record type. So I'm going to, for example, go to United States, say I want Alabama, and now I can see there's a cemeteries and funeral link under that state that I would click on that again would now have some specific resources for that specific state. And again, there's resources for every country in here as well on Cindy's List. So each of these links would get me to a site that I could search more. I've got a couple books on the back table for our in-person people, but for our virtual folks, check out your local library or purchase this book. It's called The Family Tree Cemetery Field Guide. It has a really great section on the do's and don'ts of conserving or preserving cemeteries and tombstones. Again, we've got our session on June 12th. It's a hybrid session. You can join us in person or on Zoom to learn about the symbolism behind gravestones and how to clean them. And then in person only for our local folks, June 14th at Riverside, we're doing that live demonstration of cleaning and looking at those symbols. There's also a great book called Your Guide to Cemetery Research. It's a little older, but it's got some great information on burial customs for different ethnicities and different religions. And it's got a historical timeline of deadly diseases, epidemics, and disasters, and then a medical glossary for causes of death. So if you're having a hard time deciphering or figuring out what that cause of death is, this is a great resource for you. And I mentioned this one earlier, the Over My Dead Body. It has the history about America's cemeteries that was really interesting to read. We also have some local cemetery transcription books in our Appleton collection. It's kind of that section that's right outside of this room. If you go to the right and see that circular shelving, and then there's shelving behind that. So we have, this is in library use only, but you can feel free to look through them. So we have transcriptions for St. Joseph's, Moses, St. Mary's, Highland Memorial Park, and then one that encompasses Outagamie County that would have some other cemeteries all around the county. So this is in our Wisconsin collection or Appleton collection. There's also a really great presentation I saw online. There's a link in your handout that talks to you kind of about the photography do's and don'ts. So when you do plan that trip to go visit the cemetery, it's telling you what to photograph, what not to photograph, how to photograph things. So when I go, I always photograph like the cemetery sign, overview of the entire cemetery, that section or that row that my ancestors in, and then I do a couple different shots, different angles of the specific tombstones in that location, kind of from a distance, at eye level, from the right side, from the left side. I photograph the stones around them so I can see, later on, oh yeah, that's the mother-in-law, or that's the sister that married so-and-so. I always recommend too to take photos early in the day or later in the day for the best lighting. Or some people, if you don't have great lighting or it's a day where it's kind of cloudy like today, you bring a mirror or some aluminum foil wrapped around cardboard, and you can use that and sometimes a flashlight to try to get better lighting to kind of make those letters on that tombstone pop a little bit easier so that you can more easily read those tombstones. So again, the link in your handout talks to you a little bit more about some do's and don'ts with some more specific tips. They also recommend bringing a whiteboard or some paper or marker to write down information on that, like whose grave it is, if you have a GPS coordinate, or whose grave it's nearest, especially for those ancestors who don't have a tombstone or their tombstone is unreadable. That will help you identify what you're taking a picture of, because when you go home and look at those photos later, you're gonna be like, whose burial place is this? I don't remember, or I can't quite read it. Again, you can try to get a marker placed at any of those unmarked graves, but it could cost a lot of money, or maybe the cemetery might have rules around what they allow and don't allow. So you have to check with those individual places. And then finally, I just wanted to share this awesome story that I saw on a genealogy group that I was part of to show you the power behind cemetery records. So she shared about these cemetery lot cards. So this is a photo of the burial plot cards that was able to provide her information from the cemetery records. So she says the first photo on the left is the actual cemetery plot. So you can see not much there. There are 3 people with headstones. However, in the second photo, this is the burial card. And there's actually 10 different people in this plot, even though there's only 3 headstones. And she even said the graves on either side of him are actually siblings. And there's 11 headstones, but 25 graves total within just this little section where her family is buried. So she shared that what she learned was most of the unmarked graves were his children and grandchildren who died in infancy. She was then able to use this information to find birth and death records online for them. She found out one of the graves was her grandfather's first wife she didn't know existed. And then she also found out this is her grandfather's paternal side. However, his maternal grandfather is also buried here too. They were donated graves by family members in different cemeteries. And then she shared the first person listed, I don't know who he is, so I'm gonna see how he's related to my family and figure out who he might be and why he's buried with my family. So you never know what kind of great things you can find in cemetery records, and it's worth it to stop at those cemetery record offices to see what information they might find, even if there are no markers on those burials. Again, our next session is going to be Tuesday, May 20th. So we're going to talk all about creating your family tree online. So I'll show you step-by-step how to create your family tree on Ancestry and on Family Search, talk to you a little bit about genealogy software and all that stuff. In the meantime, I have that Searching in Family Search presentation through the German Interest Group of Wisconsin on Monday, May 5th at 7 o'clock Central. And then we also have our Find Your Ancestors genealogy sessions. So our next one is going to be May 10th at 2 p.m. Central, all about uncovering hidden roots with your DNA with Dana Kelly from Madison, who's involved with the Norwegian American Genealogical Society down there. So feel free to join us for all of those. That's all I've got for you. Thank you. See if we've got any more questions here. Control F is, again, the find, how you find something. Someone shared, bring an umbrella for shadows if you're in the cemetery. That's also a helpful tip. Thank you. If your ancestor doesn't have a marked grave, how will I find it? Ask at the cemetery office. So like I just showed in that example of the burial cards, it says exactly what grave it is or what section in the cemetery. So they're going to be the ones that have the records that would be able to point you where specifically in the cemetery, even if they don't have a gravestone.
Now I've got a little story.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.